Have you ever found yourself watching a tense Senate vote? Really looking at the floor dynamics and wondering who actually enforces the rules in that room.
Right, because we see the lawmakers and we hear all the parliamentary maneuvers.
Exactly. But if the process truly breaks down, or, I don't know, if a member just simply refuses to show up for a critical vote, who possesses the literal physical power to arrest a sitting United States senator?
It is a great question.
Today, we are answering that question. We are taking a custom deep dive into the wildly contradictory and honestly highly influential role of the Sergeant at Arms of the United States Senate.
It's a position that operates almost entirely in the background, yet it serves as the absolute foundation for how the American legislative branch functions mechanically.
Yeah.
And by unpacking a really comprehensive Wikipedia article on the subject, our mission for this deep dive is to bypass the usual daily political headlines. We want to uncover the hidden gears of how the Senate actually operates.
Which is fascinating because we're looking at the evolution of a role that is simultaneously steeped in 18th century tradition and tasked with defending a modern digital infrastructure.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you are the kind of learner who enjoys finding the structural why behind the what without getting bogged down in jargon, this is the perfect exploration for you.
We're basically going to examine how a simple attendance taker evolved into a massive security and technology powerhouse.
Okay, let's unpack this. The Sergeant at Arms operates under this massive duality.
Right.
They serve as the protocol officer, the executive officer, and the highest-ranking federal law enforcement officer of the Senate.
All at the same time.
Yeah, all at once. It's this weird blend of quiet ceremonial tradition and hard practical authority.
And that duality creates a rather strange dynamic when you look at the day-to-day responsibilities.
How so?
Well, on the ceremonial side, the duties are highly specific and traditional. The Sergeant at Arms is responsible for holding the Senate gavel when it's not in use.
The gap.
Yes, and this is a very specific artifact. It's a 1954 ivory gavel, and they keep it in a ceremonial mahogany box.
A mahogany box.
Exactly. It serves as the physical symbol of order in the chamber.
Contrasting that with the House of Representatives is really fascinating. In the House, the Sergeant at Arms relies on a large ceremonial mace to maintain order.
Which is very visually intimidating.
It feels very medieval. But the Senate relies on a quiet ivory gavel in a wooden box. It paints a very dignified picture.
It does.
But peering behind that ceremonial veneer reveals the actual teeth of the role.
And the law enforcement authority here is substantial. Upon orders of the Senate, this officer has the power to arrest and detain any person who violates Senate rules or is found in contempt of Congress.
Any person.
Any person. That authority extends well beyond everyday citizens or, say, disruptive gallery members. It applies directly to the senators themselves.
Which is wild to think about. That means if a procedural maneuver requires a strict quorum and members of the minority party are intentionally withholding their presence to stall a vote, the Sergeant at Arms is the physical mechanism the majority uses to force the issue.
Right. They can be dispatched to physically compel the attendance of an absent member.
You would assume a job that involves, holding a mahogany box and occasionally tracking down truant politicians would be a relatively small niche operation.
You'd think so. But looking at the organizational chart, it goes much further than most people realize.
How big are we talking?
We are talking about an office with an annual budget in the neighborhood of $200 million.
$200 million.
Yes. Out of the approximately 4,300 total people employed by the Senate, the Office of the Sergeant at Arms employs just short of 1,000 full-time staff.
Wow.
Nearly a quarter of the entire Senate workforce reports directly to this single office.
Managing a $200 million budget and 1,000 employees seems completely disconnected from carrying an ivory gavel. How does a ceremonial and law enforcement role justify that kind of massive infrastructure?
What's fascinating here is that the Sergeant at Arms is, for all intents and purposes, the Senate's chief technology officer.
The IT department.
Exactly. They provide the senators with their computers, technical equipment, repair services, and perhaps most importantly, their cybersecurity.
That is a huge mandate.
It is. And the main operations aren't even housed in the Capitol building.
Where are they?
They are located in the Postal Square building in Washington, D.C. From that facility, they manage the internet and intranet connections, not just for the offices in the Capitol complex, but for every single senator's office across the entire country.
So they're running a massive, nationwide secure network
Yeah.
designed to protect highly sensitive legislative data and constituent communications.
Yes. And this touches on a critical concept regarding how the government structures itself.
The separation of powers.
Precisely. You might wonder why the Senate doesn't simply rely on the Department of Homeland Security or the National Security Agency to manage their cybersecurity.
It would seem easier.
It would, but the legislative branch must remain entirely independent from the executive branch. If an executive agency controls the Senate's servers, that introduces a massive vulnerability and a conflict of interest.
So the Senate has to build and maintain its own entirely independent IT and security apparatus.
Exactly, and they roll it all under the Sergeant at Arms. The top officials reporting to this office include a Chief Information Officer, a Chief Financial Officer, and an Assistant Sergeant at Arms for Intelligence and Protective Services.
It operates like a Fortune 500 tech enterprise merged with an intelligence agency.
Pretty much.
But it certainly didn't start as a $200 million tech behemoth.
No, not at all.
To understand how the office acquired this massive portfolio, we really need to examine its origins. Let's take you back to the first United States Congress.
This is a great story. The Senate first convened on March 4th, 1789. However, they faced an immediate functional crisis. They lacked a quorum.
They didn't have enough people to start.
Exactly. It took them over a month, waiting until April 6th to finally gather enough members in the room to legally conduct business.
You have to imagine the frustration of the lawmakers who actually showed up on time, sitting in a room for weeks, entirely paralyzed by the absence of their colleagues.
It must have been infuriating.
So the very next day, April 7th, 1789, they took action to ensure that paralysis wouldn't happen again. They created the Office of the Doorkeeper.
And James C. Mathers was the first person appointed to this role.
What was his main job initially?
Well, during the first 6 years of the Senate's existence, their sessions were held in private, away from the public eye. So Mathers' primary responsibility was strict access control. He guarded the doors to ensure the confidentiality of the proceedings.
And then things changed.
Yes. When the Senate eventually opened its doors to the public, he transitioned into managing security for the chamber and the viewing gallery.
Here's where it gets really interesting. In 1798, a major title shift occurred. The designation Sergeant at Arms was officially appended to his office.
And the catalyst for this change was a major constitutional test.
A former senator named William Blount was facing an impeachment trial. Mathers was dispatched to bring Blount back to Philadelphia to face the proceedings.
Right. However, to execute what was essentially an arrest warrant across state lines, Mathers needed explicit, recognized legal authority.
So they gave her a new title.
Adding Sergeant at Arms provided the necessary law enforcement weight to compel Blount's return.
It essentially transformed the position from a glorified security guard into a federal agent with the power to cross state lines and detain a former lawmaker.
And that specific event established a structural precedent that shaped the Senate's procedural mechanics for centuries.
Because that power to compel attendance wasn't just a one-off solution for the Blount impeachment.
No, it became the standard tool used to summon members to the chamber. Historically, its most significant application has been in breaking filibusters.
That's right.
When a faction attempts to stall legislation by denying the chamber a quorum, the Sergeant at Arms is the physical mechanism used to break that stall and force the legislative process to move forward.
It is the ultimate procedural trump card.
Oh.
But as the 19th century progressed, we see a distinct pattern emerge regarding how the Senate handled new administrative challenges.
They definitely had a unique approach.
Rather than creating specialized departments, they adopted what you could call a kitchen sink approach, delegating almost every new operational problem to the Sergeant at Arms.
The timeline of these accumulated duties perfectly illustrates how institutions evolve organically. They consolidate power in unexpected ways to maintain that internal independence we discussed earlier.
Let's run through that timeline. In 1829, the Senate appointed its first page.
And the Sergeant at Arms immediately assumed responsibility for supervising all Senate pages.
Now, that addition feels logical enough. If you have messengers moving throughout the chamber, the person managing the floor's security should likely oversee them.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the scope creep accelerates dramatically in 1854. when the Senate decided it needed its own postmaster and a dedicated post office.
And they operated that post office straight out of the sergeant-at-arms office.
Just think about the logistics of that era. Before secure telegraph lines or modern communication networks, physical mail was the absolute lifeblood of a senator's work.
It was everything.
Managing the secure flow of that information was a massive operational undertaking, and it was handed to the exact same person guarding the chamber doors.
Then we reach 1867, which marks a massive expansion in two completely divergent directions.
What happens then?
First, the office is officially granted regulation-making power to police and protect the Capitol and the Senate office buildings. They become a formalized police chief.
Okay, that fits the law enforcement profile.
But in that exact same year, they are also designated as the Senate's wagon master and the keeper of the Senate stables. Yes. It highlights the reality of running a centralized government facility in the 19th century. Supplying the Capitol required an extensive logistical network of horses, carts, feed, and stablemen.
And instead of contracting that out or creating a Department of Transportation, the Senate simply added fleet management to the chief law enforcement officer's portfolio.
They just piled it on.
And that tendency to keep everything in-house continues right into the media age. In 1897, a doorkeeper named James D. Preston, who was working under the Sergeant-at-Arms, began actively assisting newspaper reporters.
He was helping them navigate the building.
Exactly. He gathered bills for them and organized interviews with senators. He essentially acted as a central communications hub, which led to him becoming the first superintendent of the Senate Press Gallery.
And as new forms of media exploded in the 1930s and 1940s with the advent of radio and early television broadcasts, the superintendent role expanded alongside them.
So the Sergeant-at-Arms essentially became the de facto media relations manager for the legislative branch.
Controlling how the Senate's work was broadcast to the nation.
And that brings us to the transition from literal horsepower to automotive fleet management. In 1913, the Senate purchased its very first automobile.
Specifically for the vice president.
Right. Naturally, since the Sergeant-at-Arms previously managed the stables, they were assigned the car.
It only makes sense.
They assumed responsibility for leasing, maintenance, traffic control, and parking for all vehicles around the Capitol.
If we synthesize this timeline, we see a position conceived in 1789 to find missing senators morphing into a catch-all executive role.
A total catch-all.
They absorbed horse management, postal logistics, media relations, and parking enforcement.
The Senate chose to continuously expand this one office rather than fracture its administrative operations into separate, potentially vulnerable agencies.
Right. And as the modern era approached, this massive consolidated apparatus had to adapt to increasingly complex and severe challenges.
Modernization of the office also brought significant demographic milestones. Martha S. Pope broke a major barrier when she was elected for the 102nd and 103rd Congresses.
She became the first woman to ever serve as Sergeant-at-Arms for either chamber of Congress.
But beyond breaking barriers, the 21st century has tested the security capabilities of this office in unprecedented ways.
Before we detail this, as a reminder to you listening, we are strictly conveying the ideas and facts as presented in our provided source material today, rather than endorsing any specific political viewpoints.
Important context.
According to the text, we must examine the events of January 6, 2021. On that date, the Capitol building was attacked by a violent group of supporters of President Donald Trump.
Yes.
The source material states that this attack resulted in the deaths of at least 5 people and caused extensive damage to the building, totaling more than $2 million.
The institutional fallout from that security breach was immediate. It resulted in a swift decapitation of the office's leadership.
It happened very fast.
The very next day, January 7, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer publicly announced that if the incumbent Sergeant-at-Arms, Michael C. Stenger, did not resign, Schumer would fire him the moment he assumed the role of Senate Majority Leader.
And the response was decisively bipartisan. On that same day, outgoing Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell formally asked for and immediately received Stenger's resignation.
The failure to secure the complex led to an instantaneous leadership vacuum at the top of the Senate's law enforcement apparatus.
To stabilize the office, Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms Jennifer Hemingway was elevated and named the acting Sergeant-at-Arms.
And during this transitional period, a highly symbolic and practical appointment occurred. Eugene Goodman, the Capitol police officer who drew rioters away from the Senate chamber during the attack, was formally recognized.
When he stepped onto the inauguration platform ahead of Kamala Harris on January 20, 2021, he was announced as the acting Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms.
It was a highly visible elevation, bringing an officer who had directly defended the physical space of the Senate into the executive ranks of the office responsible for its overarching security.
Following that immediate crisis period, the Senate appointed Karen Gibson, who served as Sergeant at Arms from March 2021 until early 2025.
That brings the timeline right up to the present day in 2026. On January 3, 2025, Jennifer Hemingway, who had previously managed the office as the acting head during the immediate fallout of January 6, was officially sworn in as the 43rd Sergeant at Arms of the United States Senate.
The trajectory from James Mathers securing a private room in 1789 to Jennifer Hemingway directing a multi-million-dollar digital and physical security network today perfectly illustrates the necessary evolution of the legislative branch's self-defense mechanisms.
What does this all mean? When you look at the Sergeant at Arms, you are observing a living institutional paradox.
Truly a paradox.
It is an office that continues to uphold 18th century traditions, managing ivory gavels and enforcing rules derived from an era of wagon masters.
Yeah.
Yet simultaneously, it serves as a $200 million 21st century shield, entirely responsible for global IT networks, cybersecurity defense, and federal law enforcement.
It represents the vital necessity of the Senate to maintain absolute independence from the rest of the government.
This raises an important question regarding the future.
What comes next?
Exactly. Given how significantly this role has experienced scope creep over the last 237 years, expanding from access control to postal logistics to modern internet servers, we must consider the next evolution.
What unforeseen technology or emerging threat will define the Sergeant at Arms portfolio 50 years from now?
That's a great thought experiment.
As physical and digital security continue to merge, could we eventually see this office managing complex AI oversight protocols to detect deepfakes in the legislative record?
Oh, that's entirely possible.
Or perhaps deploying automated drone defense systems to secure the airspace directly above the Capitol dome?
The image of a future Sergeant at Arms coordinating an anti-drone defense grid while still transporting a 1954 ivory gavel in a mahogany box is a perfect encapsulation of how the Senate operates.
It really is.
We want to warmly thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material today. The next time you watch a Senate proceeding, we hope you look past the podium and recognize the massive, hidden mechanics working quietly in the background to keep the legislative gears turning.
Keep looking closer.
Keep asking questions, keep looking for the structure beneath the surface, and never stop learning. We will catch you next time.